All right, so we're going to welcome Amitava Kumar, who's going to talk to us today for a lecture.
Thank you for being here. We should clap for all the organizers again, because they're such lovely people. You know, folks were good enough to circulate a document yesterday with the newsletter. I'm not going to talk about it. Check it out sometime. It has got a patchwork of voices, basically, both in fiction and non-fiction. And I use it as a pedagogical tool with my students when I say, which is a voice that you feel the greatest affinity for? And then I say, write like that for 5 minutes. I also say, what do you feel most alien from or distant from? And then I ask them to write that too. And it's very interesting. I have myself attempted to do that. There's a story there, which is one of my favorite stories, a short paragraph-long story by Lydia Davis. And you can try, You can never write like Lydia Davis. So it's like a valuable thing to try. All right. My talk today begins with, folks enjoyed this the other day, so I thought, what happened was, Claire Massoud said, do you have a picture? I mean, are you using anything visual? And I said, yeah, because I had thought I would use one. And then my sister Tarfia here tried to use PowerPoint, and Alison Rollins said, you can do it too, Amitava. And I was like, if someone has faith in you, you should rise to the occasion. So I was like, let me do it. And then Anissa helped me with this, so thank you. Moving right along. What I had, I'll talk about this in a moment. What do I mean by voice? I read somewhere that Luciano Pavarotti, before he stepped on stage to sing, would take a bite of an apple, chew that one bite, and then he would start singing. Now, ordinarily, you would think voice is what that sound of the song is, or what he's singing. But I always think of it, or at least the thing I always want to share with my students is, what is it, that bite of the apple? What is your apple? What do you do, that one little gesture that switches you into this other mode, that is the mode where you're on stage? Does that make sense to you? So that's what I'm going to talk about. What I sent to Gwen was plots are for dead people, but voice. Oh, voice is how you declare you're alive. This is the title. And then I say, plots are for dead people. I think it was Laurie Moore who said that. And then I say, I don't know why I just said I think. I know it was Laurie Moore. This might have to do with voice. Assertiveness is something I want to avoid right now, because what I want to do is explore a subject about which I have several thoughts, but no defined viewpoint. A certain vagueness goes well with the tone of an essay, I think. Also doubt, ambiguity, ambivalence. I'll come back to this matter at the end, as all essays must, even if the essayist is not even human. Even if the said essayist is the mighty and infallible ruler of a distant planet. I'm thinking here of Joy Williams. Please see her magnificent essay, Hawk, which isn't actually about a hawk, but her dog who had that name. Cool. When I started writing Immigrant, Montana, I thought I would say to people, if someone asked me, what is your novel about, or what are you writing about, or something like that, I would say, a young immigrant comes to the United States, and while living in New York, he hears Dr. Ruth on the radio. So there was this voice. But I also thought that isn't a novel a place where voices actually meet? And in that sense, if anyone was interested in a deeper conversation, I would say, actually, so that's how it starts. But the voice I'm hearing in my head is that of this man who was born not too far away from my village, but he went to Pakistan when India was partitioned. His name was Iqbal Ahmed. He goes to Pakistan as a young man. And this part is for Maha, if she's around. And he goes to Pakistan and then gets a fellowship to come to Princeton. And the Vietnam War is going on. He goes to Tunisia, gets involved in the Algerian struggle, and he comes back, falls in with the Christian brothers, the Berrigan brothers, and is indicted for conspiring to kidnap Kissinger. The line that was repeated over and over in the court at that time when they were tried, Iqbal Ahmed and the Berrigan brothers, was, "Mr. Kissinger, you're under arrest." They were going to get him to a party, and then they were going to have a people's court and spirit him away and do this. And I thought I should write about him. But how should I write about him? What happened was that in the archives, I saw a piece of writing by John Berger, who's someone I have adored and worshipped all my life. And this was in the Hampshire College, where John Berger had written an account of Iqbal Ahmed, a small account which was published in Granta, of a man, of a boy, basically, a youth who crosses over during the partition, 1,200 miles, walking across the breadth of the country in a caravan. And I thought that I should join my voice with that of Berger and write about the later life, where he becomes a radical intellectual in New York, and around him are graduate students with their messy love lives, and I would generate a certain tension between the political and the personal. All right. As you can see, because I was newly being introduced to PowerPoint, I just went a little bit over the top. Mars Blackman, the Spike Lee character in She's Gotta Have It, saying, "Please, baby, please, baby, please, baby, please, baby, please, please, baby, baby." Having arrived in the US the same year the movie was released in 1986, I was a new immigrant, a graduate student, when I watched the movie soon after it came out. The idea of language as access. Language not just for writing academic papers. Language as desire. Language of desire. I thought that was an example of voice. And so I look at that too, at the beginning of what I was writing, what became that novel, and what I want to see in others. In David Shields' Reality Hunger, the same book where I first found the Laurie Moore quote that I started with, there is the following excerpt from Vivian Gornick. "Modernism ran its course, emptying our narrative. Novels became all voice, anchored neither in plot nor circumstance, driving the storytelling impulse underground. The sound of voice alone grew less compelling. The longing for narration rose up again, asserting the oldest claim on the reading heart, the tale. What could be more literal than the story of my life, now being told by every man and every woman?" Unquote. I have seen online the recent cover of a Gornick book. I clearly own the wrong edition of it, because this newer edition has on its cover the drawing of an eye and a quote from the New Yorker. Gornick's voice does not just tell the story, it is the story. That eye is important too. It could have been framed by the outlines of a street. Gornick has written, and I quote, I was never less alone than alone in the crowded street. Here I found I could imagine myself," unquote. Each year I teach 1 or 2 essays of Gornick's because I love her voice. The city for Gornick is a site of encounters that generate incredible energy and joy. Of one such meeting, she writes, "It was his voice that had done it, the voice." What I like about Gornick's voice in her essays is that you begin to suspect that every scrap of experience is only waiting to be given shape and meaning through the miracle of narrative speech. More than 2 decades have passed since Gornick was my colleague in the English department at Penn State, where we then both worked. Each week, she took a bus down from Port Authority to downtown State College, taught her class, stayed overnight at a hotel, and returned to Manhattan the following day. On one occasion, I stopped Gornick in the department's lounge where our mailboxes were located. "Vivian, how does one go about becoming a writer of substance?" You have to get out of the suburban life, she said, without hesitation. Look around, she said. And I did as told, looking around the room at the dark wooden counter that divided us from the administrative assistant, the photocopying machine in the corner, the bank of plain mailboxes. You will have children, Gornick said. You will start a family. You will need this job. You will never get out. You will never write. I told Gornick earlier this year that that piece of advice has haunted me ever since. It is like a bell ringing in the distance when I wake up in the morning. She wrote back, did I actually have the nerve to tell you to get out of this suburban life? Imagine, and I was only a mere 60 when I said that. I live in a small town in upstate New York. I have often wished that I lived in New York City. But the truth is that I'm from a small town, not so much in terms of size as culture. I was born and grew up in the Hindi hinterland in India. However far I move away, it is the sounds of those small places that fill my imagination, and I think of that as my voice. I was thinking about the hinterland when writing my first novel. I had bought a black notebook from a boutique stationery store close to the university in State College. I liked the notebook and went back to the store the next day to buy a second one. I had decided that one notebook would be for noting down anything I had enjoyed reading, anything that would help me with my craft. The second notebook was going to have my own writing, that is to say, my own ideas for a novel. In time, the number of notebooks of the first kind began to grow. I was collecting quotations, and the books that I have written are often in dialogue with those words. I should add that my own writing happened elsewhere. Those expensive notebooks inhibited my desire to write. I felt it necessary to switch to a cheaper variety. Many years ago, it is difficult to say when, I printed out and stuck in a notebook the little exchange between a journalist and the literary agent David Godwin. Question: what turns you on in a book? Answer: voice, not so much story. I have just been reading a memoir of this girl in Botswana. It's by Robin Scott. The first 20 pages are quite dull. Then suddenly there's this wonderful scene. Her grandfather is sitting on a veranda, surrounded by masks, drinking red wine. 2 little red drops hang on his lips. Suddenly, the masks come down, sit on his mouth in the half-light, sip, and speed away. You know, that's where the book begins. It's so arresting, so different. Godwin, the literary agent I have been quoting, wasn't my agent yet, but when I began writing something to show him, I thought, that's what I will do, something arresting and different. I wasn't worried that I didn't really have a plot ready. I'd have voice. What was I hoping to catch? I was hoping to avoid that hushed tone of TV tennis commentators at Wimbledon, public, but with a false intimacy that is adopted a few moments before a difficult second serve. Venus has appeared frail, but she can summon an inner reserve. Let's see if she can do it here. 7th double fault. Her task is going to be uphill now. Found this on the internet last night. This also meant I wouldn't have green grass or white lines or players in fashionable skirts, no strawberries and cream. I thought a prison would be rather nice. My first cousin had been arrested and jailed around that time. The state of Bihar, where I'm from, was described then as having only one growth industry: kidnapping. A doctor or a businessman or their kid would be kidnapped and a call would come for a ransom. A call had been traced to my cousin's phone. My sister believed that the police had made a mistake. It is true that my cousin had suffered. Unlike my sister, I chose to believe that my cousin had suffered for literature. In that first novel, my narrator, Binod, visits his cousin in prison. This cousin, Rabinder, is full of plans. He tells Binod that he would like to sell an idea to some big mobile phone company. It was an idea for a commercial, but Rabinder's real scheme was to get into Bollywood filmmaking once he was out of prison. The commercial would begin with a shot of a blue-green planet afloat in dark space. Then, with an instant 1,000-fold magnification, the camera would digitally zoom into the part of the landmass in northern hemisphere that lies above the Indian Ocean, the subcontinent flecked closer to the top of the screen by the white crest of a wave representing the Himalayan snow peaks. The camera would veer right, coming closer to the ground to reveal, for 1/500th of a second, the muddy expanse of the Ganges, and then fanning above it a city, visible only as a dirty wash of miniature rooftops, their color a uniform gray. It goes on like that and said the camera would avoid hitting a policeman's bicycle, and almost within that same instant, its eye would pick out a large yellow building, the state's prison. There would be a short pan along the length of a tall wall before pausing at a barred room in which would be seated a solitary man. The film would cut to a shot from above, the top of the man's head, and press to his right ear a mobile phone. What do you think? Rabinder asks Binod. Binod says that the idea is a good one, but asks why the prison is necessary. Rabinder says, honestly, can you think of any place where a mobile phone would be more needed than a prison? My own cousin was released from his jail cell. Soon he started building a luxury hotel. And David Godwin didn't take me on as a client for that book. That would happen later. I think I had mistaken a scene, the masks coming down from the wall to sip wine as an example of voice. But it was just a scene. A surprising scene, no doubt. Voice is something else. Maybe the next novel I wrote had it, this element of voice, because Godwin decided to represent me and sold Immigrant, Montana. He isn't my agent anymore. But before we parted ways amicably, isn't that the word used when talking of divorces where there are no battles over custody? I asked him a question. Should I go ahead and write in an ordinary language about an ordinary life? I wanted a subdued voice, one that didn't call attention to itself. Yes, David wrote back, yes, you must write the book you want. Leave the rest to me. Still, I decided to leave, and the reasons for that have to do with plot. And plot isn't of interest here to us, voice is. So let me get back to it. Are you guys doing okay? You know, the students say things like, many of you teach. What is the worst thing that a student tells you? Or what do you find most discomforting? In my case, it is when they say, I'm confused. Or at the end, they'll say, was this course okay? Is it more structure? So I'm aware of that, but believe me, there's a plan, I'm examining memory. Many long years ago, stepping out of an apartment building in New Haven, I found a hardcover book left in a pile of free books on the pavement. The Best American Short Stories of 1980. Such a fine list of contributors, by which I mean writers I had heard about and wanted to read. I took the book home, but didn't open it for another 10 years. I was a new father then, and the first story I read was Friends by Grace Paley, and it pierced me. Paley's writing is nothing if not all voice. Am I being too literal when I say this? Am I saying this only because people are always talking in a Paley story? Was this also the first story I read when I began noticing how right it was not to use quotation marks to mark speech, so that the whole text was marked as a speech act, an enormous act of articulation? This story, Friends, was about a group of women who are, friends. One of them is dying, and the others who are not dying, or only dying more slowly, have come to visit her. The dying woman's name is Selena, and before her friends leave, she makes them sandwiches. Here's Paley, I quote, she actually stood, leaned her big, soft, excavated body against the kitchen table to make those sandwiches. How wonderful is that? Except I realize I haven't caught the critic's voice right when I call an apt description wonderful, given that it is a description of a woman whose cancerous parts have been excised by surgery. In any case, I think you'll know what I mean about Paley if I read out to you the part where the sentence I've just quoted appears. Later that evening, Anne, Susan, and I were enduring our 5-hour train ride home. After 1 hour of silence and 1 hour of coffee and the sandwiches Selena had given us, she actually stood, leaning her big, excavated body against the kitchen table to make those sandwiches. Anne said, well, we'll never see her again. Who says? Anyway, listen, said Susan. Think of it. Abby isn't the only kid who died. What about that great guy? Remember Bill Dalrymple? He was a non-cooperator or a deserter. And Bob Simon? They were all killed in automobile accidents. Matthew, Jeannie, Mike. Remember Al Lurie? He was murdered on 6th Street. And that little kid, Brenda, who had OD'd on your roof, and the tendency, I suppose, is to forget. You people don't remember them. What do you mean, you people? You're talking to us. It goes on like that. Some years before she died, I saw Grace Paley at a farmer's market in Norwich, Vermont. She was in a corner, handing out pamphlets. I wanted to go up to her and say some of what I have told you, or offer a succinct and enlivening analysis of her story. My father addresses me on the facts of old age. But you can lose your voice when you're talking to someone you admire so much. I just bought some overpriced chocolate and maple syrup and got back in my car. Of course, I hadn't spoken to her, but to pay tribute to Paley, I put her in Immigrant, Montana, addressing a rally held on the campus of my narrator's university to protest the Gulf War. What is the time? You have to give a lecture at a writers' festival in Sivani where writers are sharing their work. You write down some notes. You realize you're talking of yourself in the second person, a trick you learned maybe from the voice in J.M. Coetzee's memoir, where he goes further, using the third person pronoun to talk about himself, setting up the right distance to examining, among other things, complicity and guilt. You're also signaling self-awareness, perhaps, opening a discussion about this younger person who was trying 20 years ago to give shape to an idea for a book. Here is another thing you want to share. I think I have made a mistake there, but I'll go here. In July 1999, I was a fellow at a writers' conference at Wesleyan. The faculty member who was teaching nonfiction and to whom I was assigned as a fellow was Liz Harris, a writer for The New Yorker and an instructor at Columbia University. One of the readings that Liz gave us was an extract from Nabokov's memoir, Speak Memory, chapter 5 to be exact. Nabokov's writing was for me a wonderful example of a desirable voice for writing because it was alert to the fact that art is always artifice. When I learned later that he had published parts of Speak Memory also as fiction in The New Yorker, I felt doubly delighted. I didn't for a moment think he was being false or meretricious. Instead, he's announcing that this text is fabricated, made up through labor and a love of words. This is the most honest thing a writer can do. In chapter 3 of Speak Memory, Nabokov is telling the reader about his distinguished family tree, his affluent ancestors, etc. His family has lost its immense property after the revolution. A lovely little description of the property follows before Nabokov breaks off and inserts a new section. This is section 5 of chapter 3, which is no more than 10 lines, and I want to read it to you. I'm going to read it out to you because more than anything else in the memoir, it was this turn that demonstrated to me the writer as magician, stepping out of the job of pulling rabbits out of hats and revealing to you the true magic, how it is all done. Cool? So I'm making a claim, my friends, that you really introduce voice by showing in your work how it came to be. A controversial claim. My own fellow at this conference has disagreed with me. I think she was wrong. Are you here? But whatever. This is Nabokov. The following passage is not for the general reader, but for the particular idiot who, because he lost a fortune in some crash, thinks he understands me. My old, since 1917, quarrel with the Soviet dictatorship is wholly unrelated to any question of property. My contempt for the émigré who hates the Reds because they stole his money and land is complete. The nostalgia I've been cherishing all these years is a hypertrophied sense of lost childhood, not sorrow for lost banknotes. He goes for a few minutes, for a few words, and then he says, the general reader may now resume. I carried this voice in my head for 20 years and then sneaked it into the pages of Immigrant, Montana. In fact, I used the word hypertrophied on my very first page. But I also decided to address the readers directly. The preceding picture is in my notebook for this novel. So I believe this matter about introducing your voice, also about how your art is an artifice to be an important part of it. And so here's the introduction and why I have taken pictures from my own notebook, what I've stuck there and put it there. The preceding picture is in my notebook for this novel. I must have torn it from a magazine, maybe Outlook, during a visit home. A reproduction of some of Satyajit Ray's sketches when he was making his first film, Pather Panchali. This is the storyboard for the scene in which Apu and his sister Durga catch sight of a train for the first time. It is a scene celebrated in the history of cinema. As in all of Ray's work, simple scenes, elegantly framed, producing a cumulative emotional effect that is shattering. Nothing in my notebook to indicate why I have cut this out from a magazine. It is possible I was thinking of collage. I suspect I was thinking more of ordinary life being transformed into art. Not just in the final film, but in these sketches too. These drawings are like calligraphy, awash with movement, as if a subtle suggestion was blowing through them like an invisible breeze. All right. So we have done that, we have done that. Now we come to the next part. In a 1997 interview for Brick magazine, W.G. Sebald told James Wood the following. I think that fiction writing, and I'm quoting, I think that fiction writing which does not acknowledge the uncertainty of the narrator himself is a form of imposture, and which I find very, very difficult to take. Any form of authorial writing, where the narrator sets himself up as stagehand and director and judge and executor in a text, I find somehow unacceptable. I cannot bear to read books of this kind, unquote. I am of the same view. So the voice of the narrator, struggling with truth, indicating with a pointed finger the joints in the scaffolding, is also mine. I don't know what the term autofiction actually means, but reviews of my last novel often use the term. The review in the New Yorker also used the term non-fiction novel, a description I hadn't heard before, and maybe not even considered possible. I could get a picture of James Wood and W.G. Sebald together, but James Wood is on your left. I don't know the person on the right, but maybe we are going to have a drink at the French house sometime soon. In a piece of fiction I'm working on right now, an Indian woman who works for CNN in Atlanta has this memory. I had become conscious that when we were in the company of educated people in Patna, my father would tell them that he was born in the same hospital as Orwell in Motihari. I later found out that Orwell was indeed born in the same sleepy town as my father, close to our ancestral village Khewali, but it is quite likely that his mother had given birth in the small bungalow that served as the Orwell residence. Richard Blair, Orwell's father, was a sub-deputy opium agent for the British. The bungalow in which they had lived in Motihari, now a dilapidated cowshed overrun by pigs and stray dogs, was described recently in one Patna newspaper as an animal farm. The story that the woman is telling in my novel is very close to mine, except that I discovered Orwell when I came to Delhi on a scholarship to finish high school. His essay, Why I Write, was a part of the assigned reading for our class. I'm mentioning Orwell now because the boldness, the freedom, the playfulness I see in Nabokov is at a huge remove from Orwell's voice that I first associated with the voice of the nonfiction writer. Back in my late teens, when I read Orwell's essay, I didn't know that this famous writer had also been born in Bihar, close to my ancestral village. I identified with him chiefly because in his essay, he described a voice in his head, a continuous story about myself, a sort of diary existing only in the mind, which was a mere description of what I was doing and the things I saw. Orwell had written, for minutes at a time, this kind of thing would be running through my head. He pushed the door open and entered the door. A yellow beam of sunlight filtering through the muslin curtains slanted onto the table where a matchbox, half open, lay beside the ink pot. With his right hand in his pocket, he moved across to the window, down in the street, a tortoise-shell cat was chasing a dead leaf, etc., etc. This habit continued until I was about 25, right through my non-literary years. Although I had to search and did search for the right words, I seemed to be making this descriptive effort almost against my will, under a kind of compulsion from outside. It is possible we all do this as children or adolescents and then grow out of the habit, unless you're a writer. In my case, I had become conscious of this activity after I began reading literary texts. Orwell was a part of that early education. I could be in a Delhi transport bus in Daryaganj, and a voice running in my head would name the objects I saw being sold on the streets, their colors, the look in the eyes of the sellers. I also read Orwell's essay about the politics of the English language. He wanted to promote writing that was unfussy and modest, never calling attention to itself. He was, of course, giving voice to an ideology, post-war socialist, I imagine. When I first encountered that language, I wanted to make it my own voice. It was also a part of my desire as a post-colonial to escape the colonial inheritance that dictated that our use of English ought to be, as Lord Macaulay had intended it, the language of the clerks. My father wrote his letters to us in stiff, bureaucratic language. My fondness for the Orwellian diction was challenged in the American graduate programs in critical theory, where I found myself producing prose that had the consistency of freshly mixed cement. In my time since, especially in the writing of Immigrant, Montana, I was trying to embrace a voice that was not just loud, exaggerated, sexual, but also exuberant. In interviews, I would say that English had been taught to us as a language in which we had to do our homework. To write fiction or imaginative nonfiction was to sense a liberation in language. The voice you own or adopt is to a large extent based on your education. Orwell was a part of my education, but that was long ago. When I think of voice now, pure voice in nonfiction, the richest, most enduring fabrication, the first thing that comes to mind are the interviews collected and shaped by Svetlana Alexievich. I also like that the voices collected in Claudia Rankine's Citizen came in response to a questionnaire shared on some listserv. What were the questions I've always wanted to know? I admire Rankine's collaboration with sculptor Kate Clark to access what is uncanny and disturbing in our racialized existence. Or think of Janet Malcolm's 41 False Starts. I've used that piece in my journalism classes a few times, but my main desire to learn from it, but my main desire is to learn from it myself. How to have a voice that is provisional and probing, fragmentary, and precise. I think of my friend Teju Kole's essay on the Black Panther, and I think it attains that ideal in a satisfactory way. So I started by mentioning Hawk by Joy Williams, and I think Teju Kole's Black Panther should also be considered in that same way, something that is more provisional and so compelling at the same time. And I'm now coming towards my end. I beat this guy though, but I can't say anything about that. It is often easy, as in this essay I've been reading to you, to slip into memoir. I have a mild distrust of this voice. It is a distrust of the comfort that an easy access to the past offers. It is possible I have on occasion tried to overcorrect this tendency, in my writing, I mean. If you have ever read my essay, Where is Your White Literature section? You will know what I mean. At a friend's suggestion, I walked up to the counter at different bookshops in New York City one fine spring day and asked the salesperson there, "Excuse me, where is your white literature section?" Over and over again, I would pose this question to helpful sales staff who, bewildered, patient, clueless, condescending, and in one case, angry, tried to tell me what to buy. At McNally Jackson, the nice sales guy said, "Who are the great white writers?" Immediately to his right was the seeming answer, withdrawing a copy of Freedom, Half an inch from its place on the shelf, he gently intoned, Franzen? He also introduced me to other names, Hemingway, Cormac McCarthy, Philip Roth. In my essay, I talk of how wearying I found the exercise, not just what people said, but the pretense I had to maintain throughout. This voice I had adopted as the Sacha Baron Cohen of American letters. You see, I've had so much fun in my little room in Siwani Inn last night. You know, I was like, let the drink you just had at the bar not be wasted. Whatever. But isn't it amazing to be here and to be in a comfortable space and to do all this stupid shit? And it's all right. You tried hard. Have some fun also. Wonderful. I've loved it so far. I remember thinking to myself that I had dissembled, I had lied, and I would never be allowed to be on This American Life. But that unstable place where earnestness gives way to exploration, and you have found a voice that is unsettling and maybe even disturbing and exhausting, is a place I want to visit again. I hope an enterprising and fun editor comes up with a compelling idea, or that inspiration strikes me at the right moment. I'd love to find out how English is spoken there, and the voice in which I'd report from that place. I have one more minute to, that's where my text ends, but I have one more minute. It's 4:40, I'll use one more minute, okay? I have a new novel coming out in a few months, which you all, of course, must buy and give to friends for Christmas. It's about the news and about making an intervention in the news. And in the same way as the videos of black men being shot in this country is the most disturbing thing you encounter in popular culture, in a place like India, where I'm from, the lynching of Muslim men on suspicion of eating beef is the most shocking and depressing thing. And when I read this journalistic report in the New York Times, where the voice of the journalist actually makes an imaginative leap. The journalist is writing about a video of a tiger being killed by villagers armed with staves, but that little thing there, the tiger slowly moved its paws in a futile attempt to block the blows. A disturbing video of the incident resembles a lynching. Then that's the voice of making connections between one thing and another, one behavior and another, etc., that I think of as what art must do, because news and other people are not doing it. So that voice that is always the collagist, the one that is the voice of juxtapositions. So I've just used this guy's tweet, for example, and then provided a list of just the lies in a chapter called The Velocity of Lies. When I started the project, I myself decided that in the last book I had used some photographs, like of Kissinger that you saw, or of Dr. Ruth, for which I had to pay a lot of money to get the images. But in this one, I've just used my sketches also a bit more. So I had cut out something from Kashmir, and I was at a residency, I had drawn a thing, and I wrote on the picture, which you cannot probably read, something like, in a little bit it will be cocktail hour. And that became the first line of the novel. So, you want to find your voice? Keep a notebook. Because I was talking about paying a lot of money, I have also a picture of Marina Abramovich. I had to pay a lot more money for that. It's about a project where she decided not to have a voice, to be silent. And she had put some things on a table and asked viewers if they wanted to use it. So there were roses, for example. But people used the thorns on the roses to prick her. Someone licked her blood. There was a pistol. Someone put a bullet in it and tried to hold it against her. And the moment she assumed her agency, by which I mean the moment she began to not remain voiceless anymore, so to speak, all these folks who were committing these acts of violence on her began to move away. So there's a meditation on that in my book too. It's about the news. And there is one passage which I want to end with now, a small paragraph. I thought all these pictures that every Indian reader of mine would become familiar with from a newspaper of a lynching and then has forgotten, how do I, if I paint it and remove some things from it, Do I heighten the perception of the picture? And do I slow down for myself as well as for my reader the process of absorbing this? That's what I'm meditating on, so that I'll end with that. Why must one slow jam the news? Because all that is new will become normal with astonishing speed. You will have to go visit your father and discover that he has pledged himself to the service of the great leader. Or you will visit your friend's house, and it will take a minute or more to realize that a meeting is underway, and now everyone is looking at you with suspicion. You notice one fine day that all the signs on the road have changed. Your town has a new name. Dogs have grown fat on flesh torn from corpses lining the street where you grew up. The beautiful tree outside your window is dead, has been dead for some time, and has, in fact, just now burst into flames. Thank you.